Greetings to Dr. Paul Semendinger, a recently retired principal, still an adjunct professor at Ramapo College, a member of the Internet Writers Baseball Association of America, a regular contributor to their newsletter, Here's the Pitch. He operates, writes for, and is editor-in-chief of the extremely successful Yankees blog, Start Spreading the News, and still pitches in a New Jersey baseball league. Might I also mention he's run 22 marathons, correct? 22?
23 now. Yeah, I have to update
23, look at that. He is the author of several books, including the least among them, which was released in 2021, and his latest book, Roy White, From Compton to the Bronx, will be released this April. So greetings to Paul. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, are you kidding? Thank you for having me. Thank you, everybody, for joining and for stopping in and to talk baseball with me. So it's an absolute pleasure to be here. I've been visiting a number of different SABR groups, and every single time it's absolutely fun. About a week or two ago, I was in South Florida with that group, and I think the meeting started at 6. And my wife and my youngest son, who's living home after graduating college and working on getting a job and all that kind of good stuff, they were thinking, what I was going to be on for an hour, 45 minutes or whatever, and saying, well, let's have dinner, but we'll wait for Dad, right? So an hour and a half, 2 hours later, they're like, are you ever going to finish? I said, no, we're having fun. So I'll be here as long as people want to be here. I mean, I'm happy to talk baseball. I'm happy to talk Yankees. I'm happy to reminisce, share ideas and things like that. But I guess the primary purpose is to talk about the new book I have coming out in April. The publication date is April 11th. And, you say that with your fingers crossed, but everything seems to be that that's going to be the day. And it's my first collaboration with a Major League Baseball player, and it's with the great Roy White, who was one of the great Yankees, often overlooked, often unheralded, but arguably the greatest Yankee left fielder in history, if you just want to think about left fielders. Babe Ruth played a little left field, Bob Musial played left field, but Roy White was a Yankee from 1965 through 1979. And if you look at the Yankee lists of all the great players, if you look at their WAR lists and their home run and RBIs and hits and stolen bases and runs scored and walks and all those types of categories, Roy White's always in the top 10 or 15 in Yankee history in all those different areas. And most of those great Yankees have had books written about them. Thurman Munson, Reggie Jackson, and numerous books, Sparky Lyle, Greg Nettles, Ron Guidry, Willie Randolph, but not Roy White. And because of a podcast that I'm on, the person who runs the network, it's called the Northeast Streaming Sports Network. His name is John McGrath. We call him Mac. He was able to get in contact with Roy White, and I was going to interview him on the air, but one thing led to the other. I had a school event that night, so I wasn't able to participate, but I just said, hey, let Mr. White know that if he would like to write his autobiography, I'll do it with him. He should have his story told. And lo and behold, he did. He brought it up to Roy White, and then like a day or two later, he sent me Roy White's phone number. So I texted Roy White. This was about a year ago, Thanksgiving. I texted him and I said, I'd love to talk to you about writing your book. The one thing I know about Roy White, or I knew about Roy White before ever meeting him, was, the Yankees of the late 70s were known as the Bronx Zoo Yankees. That was Sparky Lyle's book, right? Greg Nettles had the great quote, I wanted to join the circus or play Major League Baseball. And with the Yankees, I got to do both. And you knew all the stories about Thurman Munson and Reggie Jackson and Reggie and him fighting and Billy Martin and George Steinbrenner. And I knew that Roy White wasn't that type of person that was involved in the chaos and the craziness, and that he was just a classy human being. That's what everybody always said about him. And so I said to Roy White, I'd like to write your story with you, but it doesn't have to be a story where, you tell all the deep, dark, dirty secrets that I'm not looking to do that. I just would like you to have a chance to tell your story. So again, I texted him around Thanksgiving. He said, I'll get back to you. About a month later, I still hadn't heard from him. It was over Christmas break. I was a school principal for 32 years. And so when you're a principal, you work over the breaks. And so one day I just texted him again over Christmas break. And I'm like, hey, just, it was around his birthday. I said, happy birthday. You'd said you might get back to me about a month ago. So I'm wondering how you're doing, if you're interested. And then I was driving home and he called me. And so I, had to take a deep breath of Roy White is calling me. And I pulled off to the side of the road on a side street and we talked about it. And I gave him my pitch. I said, the entire book will be your words. And anything you want in there will be in there. But if there's stuff you don't want in there because you just don't want to go there, I respect that. And I'm not looking to do anything to make you say things you don't want to say and to put into print things you don't want into print. And he said, I'll think about it. And I don't know, within 48 hours, he sent me a text and he said, I'm in. So we started our work about a year ago, last January. And we started it by trying to do Google Meets. The technology wasn't great. For whatever reason, we just couldn't make it work all that well. And so then he said, let's just meet in person. And so we tried to think of a place to meet in person. I was thinking, like, he said Paramus Park Mall, which is a pretty popular mall around here. He goes, we'll meet in the food court. And I was thinking, like, if we meet in the food court, everybody's just going to be like, that's Roy White. So I said, like, don't you get bothered? He goes, no, not really. I said, I'd recognize you. But anyway, the first day we were going to meet was a Sunday. And in Bergen County, New Jersey, everything's closed on Sundays. We still have blue laws, and except restaurants and things like that. So I recommended a really super special secret place. And he said, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. So that super special secret place was Panera Bread. And we went there and met and sat down. I bring my computer and we just sit there in a little corner of the restaurant and talk baseball. And, he'd tell me his stories. I type them up. I'd email them to him and he'd read them. And then we'd meet again. And we did this work all of last year, 2022. By the end of the summer, late September, early October, I basically had the whole book done. We met a couple of times. I sent it out to a bunch of different people to read and to proofread and to check my facts, of course. And the publisher did the same. And really, by the beginning of December, the whole project was done. And then it was an absolutely phenomenal experience. He was as nice and as graceful and as kind and as wonderful as everybody had said. And I think the book is fantastic. The reviews have been great. And it was just a pleasure having an opportunity. I became a Yankee fan when I was 9 in 1977. So he was still there. Long story short, I've told this story before, but growing up, the reason I was a Yankee fan, or I am a Yankee fan, the reason that I got into it at all was because we had these neighbors across the street, these two young but older than me, probably the late teens at the time, these two Italian guys who were the coolest two guys I ever knew. And no one was cooler than them. And if you think back to 1977, and if you're a kid, the coolest guy in the world was probably Fonzie. And these two guys were Fonzie. I mean, they had girlfriends, they had cars. The only thing they didn't have was a motorcycle, but they could play baseball. They were athletic. And so I worshiped them as if they were Fonzie, because in many ways they were. And they were big Yankee fans. My dad's a lifelong Red Sox fan, believe it or not, the biggest Ted Williams fan ever. And so he never told me I had to be a Red Sox fan. And so I became a Yankee fan. And their favorite player was Roy White. But I have an older sister, and so she also worshiped them. And so her favorite player became Roy White. And the logic of being a 9-year-old, my favorite player then couldn't be Roy White. So I don't know if you can see him. Greg Nettles became my guy.
You can go ahead and tell the long story, Paul. I would like to hear it, and I'm sure others in the call would too.
Say again?
I'm sure others would like to hear you tell the long version of this story, because that's what we're here for.
Sure. You want to hear the story of Roy White?
No. I mean the long story about how you became a Yankees fan. That's what I was saying that uses the long story short.
Oh, I get you. Thank you. I get it. Yes, sir. Thank you. Well, that is the long story, actually. Then what my dad got tickets to take us to a Yankee game in 1977. And it was my dad and me and these two twins. That's what we called them, the twins. And that made it special for me because the two coolest guys in the world were going with my dad and I to a Yankee game. As I have here, Greg Nettles was my favorite player. He homered that day. Roy White homered that day. Mickey Rivers homered that day. And the thing that really was one of the most amazing things about going to the game that day, I remember when the Yankees played the Oakland A's. I think it was May 7th or May 17th, 1977. And Vida Blue was on the A's, and Vida Blue had an earring. And I'll never forget my dad being amazed that a baseball player had an earring. He's like, I can't believe Vida Blue has an earring. So I remember that from that day. And the day it was cinched that I was a Yankee fan was the last game of the World Series in 1977 when Reggie hit those 3 home runs. I have a picture of that up in my office, which you can't really see here because the way the camera is facing and stuff. But the funny story about that is my mom and dad are both school teachers. And the night Reggie hit his 3 home runs was back to school night, which is something they do in New Jersey. I don't know if they do it everywhere, but the teachers go back and they meet the parents and they show off their classroom. So it was back to school night. So my dad wasn't there watching the game, but it was me and my mom watching it on TV on ABC, I believe, on Channel 7. And my dad got home and it was probably after 9 o'clock, well past my bedtime. My bedtime was probably 8. And my dad said, oh, we better send Paulie to bed. He's got school tomorrow. And my mom said, oh, let's let him stay up. The Yankees are going to win the World Series. And Reggie hit the 3rd home run. The Yankees won the World Series. All the people came out onto the field and I was just mesmerized. And it was the first time in my life I was so happy that tears came out of my eyes. I never knew what tears of joy were, but because I was crying and I didn't understand because I wasn't sad. But after that, I was hooked forever. And I've been a diehard Yankee fan ever since, through good and bad. And, we were talking before, like, the Yankees don't have bad years, right? Well, they had a few. And if you're a Yankee fan, they haven't won the World Series or been in since 2009. And we're a little spoiled, overly spoiled. So that seems like an eternity for us. And on my Yankee site, we sometimes complain about that it's been so long since the Yankees have been able to get to the World Series. The 3 pitchers were Charlie Huff, Elias Sosa, and Bert Hooton. Yes, sir. Yes. And I believe that's right. And I'll tell you a funny story about that. I went to a Yankees fan fest and Michael Kay, we were just talking about him, but this is when he was just a radio announcer, or may have been just when he was working for the Post. He was like announcing something. And he said, I have tickets to a Broadway play, Damn Yankees, the revival. If someone can tell me the 3 guys Reggie hit his home runs off of, and I was standing right there. So I said it and I got the tickets. It's like the only time I ever won anything in my life. So anyway, that's sort of the story of how I came to write the book. I could tell you a little bit of Roy White's story if you'd like, or I could answer questions. I just don't want to sit here and I could talk forever. I was a school principal and an educator for 32 years. So again, we could be here till midnight. I'd be happy doing that, but let's maybe open it up to questions, and maybe that way we can tell the story of Roy White and anything else.
I've got a question. Tom Best here.
Hi,
and
Tom.
I'm looking at his stats here. I pulled up, and it certainly looks like 1970, 1973, and 1976 were like his best years. In fact, it says he led the majors. 73, he played in all 160 games, 723 plate appearances, 639 at bat. Didn't have a lot of RBIs, but 18 home runs and 60 RBIs. In those years, how crucial was he to the Yankees in that time? And what did he think about his best years?
Roy White was one of the big stars on the Yankees, but when let me try to tell you what he thinks of his role. He understands his role and what his big role was. The Yankees really had 3 big stars in the early 70s. It was Roy White, Thurman Munson, who was the
Mhm.
rookie of the year in 1970 and was, obviously ascending, and the great Bobby Mercer. Roy White's extremely modest. And so one of the things that would happen when I was writing the book with him is if he was telling me something that he did that was really great, there was usually some type of self-depreciation that was also involved. Like, I was leading the team in home runs, but I'm really not a home run hitter. So once I started swinging for the fences, I stopped hitting home runs. But when the book was done, I wrote a chapter where I wanted to sort of summarize it all about what is greatness and how did Roy White's career sort of define greatness. These are the things that Roy White did that defined greatness. And I wrote it in his voice. I wrote it like, this is what I learned about how to become great. And when he read it, he liked it. And he said, yeah, that's really good. But then he thought about it. He goes, but I don't talk that way about myself. I'm uncomfortable, actually, if we were to print that. So I said, well, it was just a thought of something based upon all the discussions that we had. But if you don't want that in there, would you have a problem if I wrote it in my voice and said, this is why Roy White was great, and this is how Roy White's career and the decisions he made and the things he did to find greatness? He goes, yeah, that's fine. So it's like an appendix to the book. It's me talking about how Roy White was great, which is what I wrote it anyway. But I sort of wanted it to be in his voice, but he's not the type of person that says like, yes, I was the guy. He's always the type of person to say I was part of a team. Somebody else did. He just called earlier today. He was just at fantasy camp. And the fantasy camp went down and played the fantasy camp from the Detroit Tigers. And he was talking to Frank Tanana, who he had never really talked before, he said. And Frank Tanana was remembering a game they had where the Yankees were losing late. It was like the ninth inning. And let's just say it was 8-0. I didn't fact check this, so my facts could be a little off if somebody goes into like the game summaries or whatever, but you'll get the general gist of the story. And it was the ninth inning, and I think he made the last out of the eighth inning or the first out of the ninth inning. And the Yankees were getting killed. Frank Tanana was pitching probably when he was on the Angels, about to win 20 games. And the Yankees didn't have a chance. So he got out and he went into the clubhouse and he started taking his uniform off. Thurman Munson was up next. He got out and he came into the clubhouse and was taking his uniform off. In fact, Munson was in the shower. And then they're listening to it on the radio. I guess it was playing over the speakers in the clubhouse or whatever. And then all of a sudden, the next guy got a hit. And then the next guy got a hit. And the next guy got a hit. And then it's 8-2. And then 8-3. And then 8-4. And Roy White says, I'm sitting there, my uniform's in the middle of the room, all crumpled up. Pete Sheehy, the clubhouse guy's taking it away. And all of a sudden, I'm starting to count like, uh-oh, I might be coming up again. And lo and behold, he starts to realize I'm coming up again. He says, get me my uniform. So they get his uniform. He puts his uniform on, and he's still basically putting it on as he comes out the clubhouse. And the guy before him must have gotten a hit. And he just runs up to the plate, grabs his bat, puts the helmet on, runs up to the plate, and he hits the game-tying home run.
Oh,
and
my.
So it's like 8-8. And then the game goes into extra innings. Thurman Munson gets called out of the shower. He had a bat, and then he had to catch another couple innings, and the Yankees eventually lose the game. So here he's telling me this is quintessential, the Roy White that I've come to know over the last year. Quintessential. I came up, I hit the game-tying home run, amazing. And then he goes, but we lost the game. And then I was sitting at my locker after the game, and Thurman Munson said, hey, Roy, if you're going to do me a favor and hit a home run, make it a game winner. I'm exhausted.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Another question I had about this. Would you say that, I'm looking here at his stats, that he would kind of be the table setter, that because in 76 he had 104 runs, and that was only on 179 hits. I mean, and again, he had some guys in back of him that could hit. And same thing in 70, scored 109 runs on 180 hits. And
he walked a lot.
Yeah. Was he in the bottom of the lineup? To be honest with you, I don't remember where he batted in that lineup.
He batted in all different places. When I remember him,
Uh-huh.
he was more of like a 6 or 7 hitter.
Mhm.
But when he first came up, he was the young guy, and he was sort of the best hitter they had after Mickey Mantle. So he played with
Mhm.
Mantle at the tail end of Mantle's career,
Yeah.
and he actually batted 4th behind Mickey Mantle. He was the guy who protected him.
Really?
In
Was
seven,
that his first full season?
those
in
were his first.
66?
Yep, in his first couple seasons. 60.
Right.
You could see it by his numbers, though. He played and then he didn't play, right?
Right,
Was,
yeah.
and in 67, he spent much of the year. Actually, the Yankees had traded him on loan, basically, to the Los Angeles Dodgers. The Dodgers saw him
Really?
as their type of player. He was a fast
Huh.
guy, speedy guy, steal bases, on base, sort of like a Maury Wills type. And they were really high on him, but the Yankees needed him back. And so if you look, he played 1 year with Spokane. I think he hit like 343, something like that,
Mhm.
for AAA. And then he came back to the Yankees.
Hmm.
In 76, Mickey Rivers led off and Roy White basically batted second.
Hmm.
And they had an agreement between themselves. Like, they had their own secret signs. And if Mickey Rivers would give Roy White some type of sign, Roy White would know that Mickey was going to steal. And they had this whole thing worked out great, and it worked out phenomenally, right? The Yankees won the pennant first time in 12 years, went to the World Series. And for whatever reason, in 1977, Billy Martin changed a lot of what he was doing, and that went away, and Roy White didn't get as much playing time. And that was something that was never really explained to him by Billy Martin, because that was a frustration for him, I think, and Mickey Rivers too, because they had something that was really working, and then they went with a whole different approach. So he batted in different spots in the lineup, depending on when it was and depending on who was the other players around. The other thing about the lineup that's interesting is after the 79 season, Roy White went to Japan for 3 years. He played with the Yomiuri Giants. And his first year in Japan, 1980, was Sadahara O's last year.
Oh, wow.
And he batted 4th in Japan behind Sadahara O. So think about that. He batted 4th behind Mantle. He batted 4th behind O. Like, how cool is that?
It's amazing.
As a Red Sox fan, I remember Roy White. He always seemed to be on base every time he played against us. One thing I do remember, if I remember right, he had his batting stance. He kept his hands really low. Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
He talks about that one of those first years, within the first month or two of the season into May, he was leading the Yankees, maybe even the American League, in home runs. And that's when he was saying, like, I think I'm a home run hitter. And he started trying to hit home runs. And then he realized that he wasn't. And because of that, he wanted to make sure that he never, ever fooled himself into trying to, muscle up and hit the ball out, because basically all that did was lead to flyouts. I remember an ad as a kid for a Volkswagen Rabbit. I don't know if anybody else remembers this, but Reggie did these ads in the Volkswagen Rabbit ad, and it said, "Home runs are a mistake." I remember that being the title of the whole page ad, maybe in Sports Illustrated or Baseball Digest or that kind of thing. And anyway, Roy White, I think, believed that home runs were a mistake, right? You shouldn't swing for them. They should just be a result of a good hit. So that's why he started choking up on the bat when he was batting, to remind himself that I'm not a home run hitter. I need to just make contact and drive the ball where it's pitched and get on base.
Well, I was going to ask just about the writing of the book. It seems like this came together really quickly.
Yes.
I mean, I could be wrong on that one. Can you explain that? I mean, it seems like there were no obstacles in the way. You just got a great story and started writing. Can you just explain the process a little bit?
Yes. So the process was, he said, "I'll write the book with you." And I said, "Great." And so he set up a time. It was in January, a year ago. And there's still a lot of worry about COVID a year ago and meeting in public. And I think Roy White is generally reserved a little bit. Like, I don't think he was willing to just say, "Yeah, come on, let's meet somewhere." somewhere. Like I got to make sure that this guy's on the up and up or whatever. So the first couple times, as I say, we did it over Google. We tried to do it over Google Meet, and I asked permission to record the meetings so I could then go back and listen to what we said and then write better. Because in the beginning, what I was doing was he was talking and I was using a notebook and writing by hand. We did that twice, but for whatever reason, he couldn't make the video on his end work. So it was really just like talking on the telephone over a computer, which I think was uncomfortable and awkward and just weird. And so about a month or two into the process, it was February of last year. I was actually in Boston visiting my son, who lives in Cambridge, and we were pulling into the hotel. And so I had my hands all full of luggage and all sorts of stuff. And my phone rings and it's Roy White. And I'm like, oh, I got to talk to him. And so I'm dropping things and we're trying to get in. And he's like, that's when he said, like, I'd like to meet you in person so we could do this. It's easier. I don't want to do it on the phone or over a computer. It's just not conducive to having a good phone call. I want to talk face to face. And that's when he said, let's meet at Paramus Park. I said, I'll be home that Sunday. And he said, that'll be perfect. But Paramus Park was closed. So then we shifted to Panera Bread. But actually, truth be told, as I'm thinking back, we were traveling home that Sunday and I was telling my wife we have to be home by lunch so I can meet Roy White. And he had actually called me a couple hours before, and I think they were having a stove delivered to their house. And he said, it was supposed to come by 10 o'clock and it's now 10:30 and they say it's going to take a couple hours. So I'm going to have to cancel. At that point, you might think like, oh, he's blowing you off, right? You think like, oh, all right, fair enough. Like, why would Roy White want to spend any time with me? I'm a nobody. But I just had this sense, and I was right, that he's a sincere human being. He's just a good human being. So I said, okay, in my mind, I thought like, Major League Baseball players have trouble with deliveries? I would think like no, that they shouldn't have trouble with anything. Roy White he should have been the first stop. And then we were going to meet a different time, and he called me and he said, I can't meet with you. And this was my favorite story. He goes, I have to go to a card show up in Connecticut. Joe Pepitone took sick and Roy White had to go pinch hit for Joe Pepitone literally at the card show. So I thought that was a great story. And so he said, we'll just meet another day. And eventually we did. And really, yeah, that's how it happened. We'd meet, I'd write, I'd send him the transcripts of what the writing of what I wrote chapter by chapter. We'd sit down. I'd say, did I make any mistakes? He'd say, well, here's this, that, and the other thing. But there weren't too many mistakes, because he was very thorough in his storytelling. Sometimes he'd say, I just remembered this thing. I'd like to put that in there. And we put that in. And that was really the process. And so I retired as a principal at the end of last school year. So in last June, I worked through the summer. So my first day of retirement was September 1st. But I couldn't have gotten the job done if I was still basically working full time. Over the summer, I spent the summer with my replacement, who's a phenomenal principal. And so we spent a lot of time, but a lot of the things that I would have had to do to gear up, she did. And so I was really accessible a lot more for Roy White, and to spend a lot of time writing because I didn't have to attend certain meetings that take forever. You can imagine, people always would say like, what do you do as a principal in the summertime? Like there's nobody there. And I'm like, right. But when everybody gets to school, like everybody knows where to go, right? Yeah. How do you think that happens? There's a lot of work in the summer, but I didn't have to do as much of it. And so I was much more at liberty to get writing done and to meet with Roy White. And so, yeah, besides those couple little snafus, it really went very well. We live like 3 towns away. So we're very close to each other. And anytime I needed to meet him or talk to him, I would text and I'd say, are you available this day or the other day? And he was usually pretty quick about calling me back or answering the phone and say, yeah, I can meet you next Tuesday. How's 2:00? Sure. Great. So, yes.
Hey, Paul, it's Dennis Garcia. Thanks again for your time. I love.
Yeah, nice to see you again, Dennis. How are you?
Again, doing well. Thanks again for your time. I love listening to these stories. I mean,
Thank you.
being a lifelong Yankee fan, I mean, this is just great to hear. You know, I know Roy White had a few managers in his career: Ralph Houck, Bill Verdon, Billy Martin, Bob Lemon. Of those guys, did he have a favorite, perhaps someone which he was more aligned to, if you will?
Yes. Ralph Houck was his favorite manager by far. And the reason he would say that was that Ralph Houck was honest. And I can't put words in his mouth, but I think if you read between the lines, he didn't necessarily feel that all of the managers he worked with were necessarily as honest with him. For example, in 1977, he was told he was going to play a lot in the World Series. That was a special World Series because he grew up in Los Angeles and Compton. Thank you, Tom. Yes, I taught in the school for 35 years and I get the summer work connection. Thank you. And he didn't really play much in the 77 World Series, and he felt he wasn't being treated fairly by Billy Martin. And he talks in the book about how when the Yankees had won the World Series, he was bitter and he didn't attend the World Series parade. Something he regrets today, because then the next year, even though he played in the World Series and was great, he didn't attend the World Series parade because he thought it was somehow, being hypocritical that he would attend one year and not the other. But he regrets that now. But he felt that Ralph Houck was honest. Ralph Houck was a straight shooter. Ralph Houck was also very humble. He loved the things that Ralph Houck would say to the team, like, listen, we're going to go out there and play. You don't have to be the hero. You just have to be better than the guy on the other team who's playing your position. And Roy White said, like, I'd sit there and be like, I have to be better than Willie Horton. I've got to be better than Yaz. Oh God. And he talks about one time when the Yankees got beat and Ralph Houck was livid, and he goes into the clubhouse and he starts like yelling at the players, like, you have to be better. This was just a terrible game. And then he sort of stopped and he goes, well, maybe I needed to manage better. So I think he really appreciated Ralph Houck. I think he liked Bill Verdon a lot too. Bill Verdon wasn't a Yankee manager for very long, but he was a guy who really pushed them physically. He gave them probably the hardest spring training they ever had, where he really worked them hard, which actually benefited Roy White when he went to Japan because it was a much more physical type of environment for getting ready to play baseball. The winter before playing with Bill Verdon, Roy White picked up karate. So he came into camp very physically fit and in shape. A lot of the other players, he talks about Lou Piniella and him in the outfield, and Bill Verdon would hit a fly ball here, you'd run and catch it, then he'd hit a fly ball over there, and you'd have to run and catch it, then he'd hit a fly ball over here. And he said, like, Lou Piniella was literally dying. And he goes, but I was in pretty good shape. It didn't hurt me as much. The other guys were getting sick and they couldn't believe how hard it was, but it wasn't as bad for me. And I think that probably helped him a little bit, like at 70s, 75 season. So yes, I think he really liked playing with Ralph Houck. I think he really liked playing with Bill Verdon. I think everybody liked playing for Bob Lemon because it just was that Billy Martin had been fired, and it was chaos, the Bronx Zoo again. And Bob Lemon just put out a lineup and he said, go out and play. And I think that was exactly what the Yankees needed at that time, all those players. And I think he appreciated that.
Great. Thank you.
No, thank you.
Paul, I have
I've
a
got
question.
Oh, go ahead.
Thanks. What did he say anything about playing for Steinbrenner?
I think he basically enjoyed playing with Steinbrenner. Again, he didn't, he wouldn't, and I didn't ask. I never wanted to, like, my goal was to write Roy White's story, and I never wanted him to think that, I was a fan. He knew I was a fan. It's in the beginning of the book. I tell the story about my neighbors and, how they were big Roy White fans and all that kind of stuff. And I even tell another story. The one neighbor who made me a Yankee fan has colon cancer, which, he's probably in his early 60s at this point, mid to early 60s at this point. And, I never asked Roy White for his autograph when we'd meet, I'd never wear a Yankee hat or anything like that. I just didn't want, I wanted to be professional. I wanted to be the writer, not the Yankee fan. But the one time I broke that rule because here's one of his biggest fans and he's got cancer. And so I took what I thought was a risk, and I bought a get well card, and I just asked Roy White to sign it at the end of one of our sessions. I said, "Can I ask you a favor?" And he goes, "Do you want my autograph?" I was like, "Yeah, I do, but I can't ask for me." So I said, "Well, it's not for me." And I told him the story, and he was like, "Yeah." And that's also in the introduction to the book. But I forget your question. I was going somewhere else.
Oh, about Steinbrenner.
Oh, correct. So I never
As the owner,
really
yeah.
wanted to push. How do you feel? I'll say this. In 1979, at the end of the season, he didn't feel he was given a straight, honest answer by the Yankees as to how much they could afford to pay him and how much they were willing to pay him to stay on with the Yankees. They had given him a line about, we can only afford, because you're this old, this is your age, a certain amount of money. And he found out that Luis Tiant, who was older, was offered more money, and that didn't sit well with him. But he turns around and he says, right, but when I came home from Japan, George Steinbrenner hired me as a coach a couple of different times. He hired me as an executive. I became a roving minor league instructor. So I think he respected George Steinbrenner. But I think, like anything else, there were times when he, like in 79, he didn't necessarily feel he got a fair shake. He was present when the big story, I think it was 1985. Yogi was the manager. Yogi was then fired, let's say 15 or 18 or so games into the season. A week before, Steinbrenner had said, "Yogi's my manager all year." This is when the Steinbrenner was just firing everybody left and right. Like every year, it seemed like the Yankees had 3 managers. Yogi was fired. And then that's when Yogi Berra had the rift with the Yankees. And he said, "I will never show up at Yankee Stadium again as long as George Steinbrenner's there." And he doesn't again show up again until 1998 or whatever. And then on Yogi Berra Day, that's when David Cohn, Yogi's there, Don Larson's there. Don Larson throws out the first pitch to Yogi Berra. And then David Cohn goes out and throws a perfect game. And so, like, crazy. That was the first day George and Yogi had reconciled. George actually went to the Yogi Berra Museum, which is in Little Falls, New Jersey, and apologized. One of the Yankee announcers, Susan Waldman, set this whole thing up because she's like, Yogi Berra's getting older and he can't be not part of the Yankees. But anyway, long story short, Roy White was at that table. He was in that meeting when Yogi Berra was fired and the rift with the Yankees started. And as it reads in the book, he said, "But that's not my story to tell," and which I appreciate. It's right in line with who he is as a person. And so, and again, I just didn't want to cross that boundary and make him feel uncomfortable, like telling me stories that he might not want to tell. He's told me a lot of stuff, but if he shares it, that's great. I never wanted to be the guy to pry, because above all, I wanted him to trust me, which I believe he does, because I never pried, and nothing ever appears in that book that he didn't want to appear. There was never a line that I wrote that he said, "No, I don't want that in there." So.
Hey, Paul, this is Dennis again. Just another question. Did he share any thoughts about his view on the current state of the game, as to what's going well, what's going less well, and any thoughts on that?
He talked a little bit about the Yankees. We talk a little about the Yankees. I think he likes it. I think he thinks the Yankees are doing well. I think he gets frustrated that the Yankees aren't winning World Series. When Oswaldo Cabrera came up, he's really high on him, or at least he was in our conversations. Oswaldo Cabrera, he said, reminds him a lot of himself. Roy White came up as an infielder. Oswaldo Cabrera came up as an infielder. They're both switch hitters. And the Yankees put Oswaldo Cabrera in the outfield last year, and he might be the starting left fielder for the Yankees this coming year. And he says, "I see a lot of myself in him." He's a young guy. He's got a lot of spark. He's not a home run hitter, but he can hit the ball out. He's a switch hitter. He's speedy. He's aggressive. He plays the game the right way. He never criticized the game today. He when the Yankees were winning, he thought it was great, and when the Yankees were losing, he would be frustrated. But again, I never pushed him to like. I'm not the biggest Aaron Boone fan. I don't think he's the greatest manager ever. As a Yankee fan, I get frustrated because it just seems like he's overmatched a lot. And I don't understand why the Yankees signed him in the first place. He had never managed. He'd never coached. He never even managed a little league team. When the Yankees first signed him, I said, I've coached more games than the Yankee manager. Makes no sense. But I never asked him, like, do you think Boone's a bad manager? What do you think? I never wanted to push that.
I had another question.
Yes.
Did he
Tom.
have certain friends on the Yankees?
Yes.
Were there certain guys that he got along with well and they've maintained lifelong friendships?
Yes. So I have a couple of chapters in the book where I tell the story of Roy White from the perspective of some of his teammates. And the people who I reached out to were the people who I asked him to have me reach out to. And so one of his best friends was Thurman Munson. You know, Roy White was with Bobby Mercer, the veteran. By the time Thurman Munson comes up, he was the star. And Thurman Munson's locker was right next to Roy White's. So for a decade, basically from 1970 until Thurman dies in 1979, they dressed every single day next to each other. So they were great and dear friends. He was also obviously friends with Bobby Mercer, who was a young guy coming up at that same time with him. Mercer, though, was traded away for Bobby Bonds. And so he didn't spend that whole 70s with the Yankees. He came back, in 79, I think in June, a couple months before Munson died in the plane crash. And he was also friends with, as you'd expect, the Yankees that were the guys that were the non-controversial players, the guys like Willie Randolph, Chris Chambliss. Early in his career, he was roommates with Horace Clarke, who was really a good ball player, who's unfortunately, it's called the Horace Clarke era when the Yankees were really bad. But he said he and Horace Clarke used to like to listen to jazz music. And I think Horace had the albums and Roy White had the portable phonograph. And so they'd bring that with them each other on the road because they were roommates, and they'd go back to the room and listen to jazz music. On other teams, he was friends with Rod Carew. He talks about how he enjoyed going to play against the Twins. And sometimes after the games, he and Rod Carew and Tony Oliva would get together and talk baseball. He did talk about how he was friendly with Fritz Peterson and their wives were friends. And Fritz had a house in Oakland, New Jersey, again, not far from this whole, it's in Bergen County. So they all lived in and around these areas. And, they had been to Fritz Peterson's house not long before the whole thing broke that he traded wives with Mike Kekish. And so he talks about, again, we didn't get into too much of that, but he just said, nobody saw that coming. We were just at his house. Everything seemed fine. So, but those were some of his guys, Horace Clarke, Chris Chambliss, Willie Randolph, as you could imagine, the typical guys who just went out, did their job and stayed out of the fray. Mickey Rivers was also a good friend. Oscar Gamble, I think he was a Yankee twice. The first time he was a Yankee, they were buddies.
What kind of relationship did he have with Mantle?
I think more of a teammate who sits in reverence of another teammate. I don't think he hung out with Mantle. When he would tell stories about what he would do after the games, he would talk about going out to dinner. Mickey Mantle's reputation, if nothing else, the way the story's told, is Mickey went out and, lit the town up a little bit more than Roy White must have. And when I talked about going out with guys like Tony Oliva and Rod Carew, he said, like, yeah, we get together and we talk baseball. which, I guess that's what we all do, right? If I get together with people, I talk school. Hey, what do you think about the new test or the new mandate or whatever? But I just think it's funny because that's what I would have done if I was hanging out with Tony Oliva or Ron Carew. I'd talk baseball. You'd think they'd maybe talk about other things, but no, they just talk baseball, which is just, I just think he was a baseball fan. He grew up loving the Cleveland Indians. He lived in Compton, but he grew up loving the Cleveland Indians and the Cincinnati Reds. And he liked them both because of their uniforms. So he thought it was really cool when the Yankees made the 76 World Series and they were playing the Reds, which was one of his favorite teams as a kid growing up. So did that answer the question? Sort of.
See, he was born out in Los Angeles, kind of an LA kid, things
Yes.
coming up in that era.
To a mixed marriage family, a black and a black mom and a white dad. So that happened in the 1940s. And so they were, 80 years ahead of their time, 70 years ahead of their time. And the marriage didn't work. And he was raised by his mom with a brother and a sister. But his mom didn't really have employment. And thanks, Dennis. Dennis just left us. And so they grew up in poverty. And he said there are stories that he tells about gangs. And one time when he almost got beat up, he and a bunch of friends were chased by a really rough group of guys. The ironic thing about that story is as they were being chased, he ran across his Little League field, ducked, through the fence or whatever to the Little League field. And it had rained, or at least had drizzled earlier, and he slipped on the grass and laid there, and he was waiting to get beat up. But I guess the guys didn't see him go that way, and they never came. And he said he remembered that time years later when he was playing left field for the Yankees. And he goes, I was in left field in Compton one day, and I that's where I thought I was going to die. And how ironic it is that now I'm playing left field for the Yankees. So he grew up in poverty. He did not have it. He did not have it easy. He talks about how the doorbell would ring and they'd sometimes pretend like they weren't home because it was a collection agency looking to get money. And, there are things that kids in inner cities sometimes do in order to make ends meet. He not proud of these things, but, he shoplifted things as a kid, a pair of pants, he had to wear the same shoes like all year. He'd get one pair of shoes a year. But as he grew up, he and a couple of his friends were really straight-laced, and they worked hard in school and they gave their efforts to the ball field rather than doing other things. But it was definitely not. He did not grow up with having things. He grew up not having things.
So was he just an overall great athlete, or was like baseball his game?
Baseball was his game, but he also played a little bit of football. I think they played a lot of basketball around. But because he talked about playing basketball with some of the guys in the minor leagues. And then he talked about playing basketball. I don't know if they did this in the 70s. They probably did in the areas where you guys are living, but they used to make money during the off season by playing basketball games at local high schools and things like that, make $100 in a night and play against the faculty. And he would talk about that, but he would never, like he said, Gene Michael was an outstanding basketball player. The guy became the GM of the Yankees. He was a shortstop, played with the Dodgers, played with the Yankees. He was the guy, really the mastermind in the early 90s who put the great Yankee teams together as a Yankee executive, Gene Michael. He talks about how great Gene Michael was at basketball. He never, I wasn't really that good. He's always self-depreciating, but he did play football for a season in high school. And I think the very first catch he ever made was on a kickoff and he ran it back for a touchdown and things like that. But he was primarily a baseball guy. And there were a whole bunch of really good baseball players in the area where he grew up, including Reggie Smith, who we played against in the World Series in 77 and 78. And he was also he was an outfielder in the big leagues, but coming up, he was a shortstop and an infielder.
Did he talk about the Red Sox rivalry at all?
Yes. He's talked especially, I'm sorry, Mark, about this.
Sorry, Mark. Sorry to bring it up.
He talked a lot about 78.
I was going to ask the same thing. So
He talked about 78 and how the Yankees came back. They were down so much and they caught the Red Sox and then beat them. And then the big game against the Red Sox, in Fenway Park, when Bucky hit the home run. Bucky actually hit the home run with Roy White's bat. People remember the stories of being Mickey Rivers' bat, but Mickey Rivers was using a Roy White model bat. So it was actually Roy White's bat that Bucky hit the home run with. But he talks a lot about how that whole year, as the Yankees started catching the Red Sox, Munson would say to him, we're only 8 games back and it's August. If we keep winning, we can catch them. And the next day he'd be like, we're only 7 games back. And he kept having those games in Fenway. And he says, if we can be within 4 games by the time we head to Fenway, we can catch these guys. And he was the guy who was really optimistic about it. And when the Yankees then went up to Fenway, they were 4 games back. And, that was the Boston Massacre, where the Yankees just devoured the Red Sox. And little Paulie Semendinger at 10 years old was euphoric, not quite understanding that my dad, who was 40 years old and a lifetime Red Sox fan, was torn apart inside, especially that Bucky Dent game. I remember jumping around, being just so happy and not quite understanding till many years later how miserable my dad must have been that day that the Yankees had beaten them.
I was there that day, actually, and not too pleased about it as a Red Sox fan myself. So it was sort of like an exorcism in 2021 when the situation reversed itself and the Red Sox knocked out the Yankees. So
yes, and in 2004.
Well, there is 2004, yes.
Which it still hurts.
It took me about, I was 59 years old and the Red Sox hadn't won my whole lifetime. I didn't know if I'd ever get there. And it was at least a week after they finally won the World Series that year that when I woke up in the morning, I had to double check that I was really awake, that this was not a dream, that this really did happen, and reassure myself. But
what year were you born, Bill?
45.
All right. So my dad was born in 38. So
yeah. I don't remember the Red Sox losing the 1946 World Series in Game 7 because I was only 1. But
he does. He remembers that, and he has a twin brother himself who I've told this story before, but there was a Chesterfield cigarette ad in a Life magazine in 1946. And the 2 guys in that ad were Stan Musial and Ted Williams.
Yeah.
And my dad and my uncle were the only kids in the family, the 2 boys, and they loved each other and they were best friends and they played baseball and they were big baseball fans. And at that moment, at 8 years old, my uncle said, I'll be a St. Louis Cardinals fan. And my guy is Stan Musial. My dad said, I'll be a Red Sox fan. And my guy's Ted Williams. And to this day, they're still diehards.
They both took up smoking because of the ad.
They didn't. Neither one of them smoke.
I have that ad up in my room.
No
Ted
way.
Williams did say that he really regrets the one thing he really regretted as much as anything was agreeing to that advertisement.
How about that? Mark, you have that ad.
Yes, I do. Yep.
That's phenomenal. That's phenomenal.
I'll just tell you one other story here. I did a book that came out in 2019 with David Fisher. And it was a publisher put us together. Me as a writer who's a lifelong Red Sox fan, and him as a writer who was a lifelong Yankees fan. And it was called Red Sox versus Yankees. We picked who we thought was the greatest player at each position for each team. And then they ran some computer simulations where they had the greatest Red Sox team play the greatest Yankees team to see what would happen. And then we also picked what we thought was the best team of all time. I picked the 2018 Red Sox, and he picked, I think it was the 1999 Yankees. And the simulation played those 2 teams against each other to see what would happen. But what was, when we were going through positions, people pick different people. I picked Ted Williams as the best Red Sox left fielder of all time. Imagine that. But he picked Roy White. And the first thing I wrote to him was, Roy who? I didn't really follow the Yankees, but then he gave me his reasoning. I looked at it. I said, "You agree?" I mean, I agree. And I couldn't recite his whole lineup, but what was interesting was Joe DiMaggio ended up on the bench.
Wow.
He did not make the starting 9 position players for the Yankees.
Because he picked Mantle in center.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Bill James wrote a thing a long time ago in one of those early books. I'm trying to see if I could see it on my shelf across the, like the Bill James historical abstract or one of those.
Yeah.
Or the case for Cooperstown. And he compares favorably Roy White to Jim Rice. And he said Jim Rice and Roy White were playing in different eras. Roy White played in a much less offensive era, obviously in the late 60s going through the early 70s, and Jim Rice played into the 80s and the late 70s when offense went up a little bit. But he compares the two very favorably.
Politics of glory, Paul.
The politics of glory. Yes, Ryan. I have it over there, but I can't see the title. So yeah, so it's interesting. I'll tell you a funny story. The Yankees had an announcer, used to play first base for the Phillies and the Cardinals back in the 50s and 60s, named Bill White. And so the Yankees announcers were Bill White, Phil Rizzuto, and Frank Messer when I was growing up. And I was talking to somebody a couple of months ago who's a big Yankees fan. And he's like, and we're talking about my retirement. What are you doing now? And I said, well, I'm working on this book with Roy White. I don't know if you ever heard of him. He was the Yankees. Like, oh, I know Roy White. He was with Phil Rizzuto. They did great games in the booth together. I said, well, yeah, sure. I don't know. That was Bill White. And I told that to Roy White, and he goes, yeah, we got mixed up a lot. The interesting thing too is I wrote an article on this on my Yankee site. The old Ted Williams for Joe DiMaggio trade. I wish the Yankees had made that trade because everybody thinks it was an equal trade. Oh, what? No. The Yankees would have made out tremendously more on that trade. DiMaggio retired in 51 and Ted Williams stuck around through 1960. He was a better player by every measure, except maybe defensively, but there's not even a question. That would have been a great trade for the Yankees.
Putting together the book, I know you mentioned that you didn't want to pry and keep certain things private, but obviously everything that he opened up with you couldn't make it in the book. What's the best story that had to hit the cutting room floor?
That I couldn't tell you because if it's not in the book, I couldn't print it. I couldn't tell it. When things just click, like the stories he told were the ones he wanted to tell. So those are the ones that ended up in the book. I think he was less happy about one story in Chicago, by the way. So very appropriate here. Probably somewhere around 1976, he came up and he made an out in Chicago, and he was very upset. And he usually didn't express his emotions on the field, and he beat the heck out of the water cooler in the dugout in Comiskey Park, just beat it to smithereens. And so there was water everywhere, and it was a disaster, and he had to go out to play left field, and he was soaking wet. And he thinks it was funny that the next time they went to Comiskey Park, the water cooler was bolted to the wall, things like that, so that kind of stuff couldn't happen. And when I talked to Chris Chambliss about that, Chris Chambliss also brought up the water cooler incident. It's like, oh, I remember when Roy lost his cool. And so they laugh about that story. Here's one that I don't think is in the book. I don't think this made it. Roy White was famous for leaping over the left field wall and taking home runs away. So there's lots of photographs and of highlights of Roy White being able to leap over the fence and taking a home run away. And he tells the story that there was a game they were playing the Orioles in the early 70s. Might have been, I don't want to say the year, but the Yankees, it was one of those years Might have been 72. The Yankees had been bad. It might have been 70. That might have been 1970. And one of those years they finished in second place. And they were in it right until the last couple of days of the season. And when the season was over, the Yankees actually had a celebration in the clubhouse. They broke out the champagne because they finished in second place, and the sports writers ripped them up for it because they're like, this is what the Yankees have become. They're celebrating second place. But during that season, there was a game late in the year. They were playing the Orioles, and Roy White hit a bomb. He hit it, I guess, to center field, and Paul Blair went back, and he leaped the wall, and he made a catch, and he robbed Roy White of the game-winning home run. So as Paul Blair's running off the field, Roy White says to him, I'll get you. I'll get you back one day. And he never did. It just never happened. Roy White never robbed Paul Blair. So fast forward like 20 or 30 years, they're at a fantasy camp, and Paul Blair shows up, and he sees Roy White, and he has a big smile. And somehow he got a photograph of the time he leaped the wall and Roy White got out. And he goes, hey, Roy, remember this? He said he was pretty mad about that, but mad in a good way, I think. But yeah, so I don't think that story's in the book.
I've got a question. I wrote a little while. My dad grew up a Yankees fan, and I think it was just in the era that he grew up. I mean, the Yankees were kind of like, for a time somebody grew up when the Cowboys were good or something like that. That's why I became a Yankees fan. And he told me stories and stuff. But I also had a friend, and long story short, his name was Stan Musial Sturts. So needless to say, when I went over to his house, what we did. And his dad always said, when the ball game was on, you boys either get out and play, or you sit here and you keep your mouth shut and you listen to the game. But I came a Cardinal fan and us. But Cardinals kind of the same way. But there's a mystique to the Yankees that's just not like many other teams. Did he talk about the idea of just what being a Yankee meant to him?
Yeah, I think it meant the world to him. When he was signed originally, a lot of the guys around him were getting signed to big-time contracts, and he did not get a big-time contract. I think his contract was like $5,000. One guy that he was growing up with got like a $50,000 signing bonus and all this, and he didn't. I think that guy's last name was Kelly. Dave Kelly, I think was his name. Best player around on the Sandlots and in the American Legion and in high school, but he didn't make it to the major leagues, but he got this big bonus. But he thought, you know what? I'm signing with the Yankees. And while he wasn't a Yankee fan growing up, obviously everybody knew the Yankees, and they were always in the World Series. So he figured he would just be continuing that great tradition. And he did talk about that, like how awestruck it was to walk in the locker room and see Elston Howard and Mickey Mantle and Whitey Ford and Roger Maris. And then how great it was again when the Yankees became great and they became the world champions, and how special it was. The other interesting thing, though, is that he lost a couple of years playing at Yankee Stadium when the Yankees played 2 years at Shea. And so some of that great Yankee mystique was gone. And I don't think many of the Yankees at all enjoyed playing at Shea. I don't think he did at all. I know Bobby Mercer didn't. Bobby Mercer, I think, hit 2 home runs at Shea the whole year, and it was in the last homestand or something like that. He had a terrible year, and then he was traded for Bobby Bonds. So, yeah, he is a Yankee through and through. I told you I wouldn't wear a hat or a shirt or anything, but he would come wearing Yankee stuff, which I always thought was kind of funny, because I'm like, that's going to help people recognize you even more. And most of the time we didn't get interrupted, but there were plenty of times when people would come over and they just say, Mr. White, I just got to say thank you. And none of them ever asked for his autograph. They just wanted to shake his hand. A couple times people asked for pictures, which was kind of fun. My favorite time was one time there were a couple of kids and a mom from my school at Panera, and they saw me and they didn't have any idea. These are elementary school kids. They had no idea who Roy White was. But if you're an elementary school principal and you're silly, like me, like you're sometimes could be like a rock star, and they were excited to see me, and they came over to the table, and instead of going to see Roy White, they were like, oh my God. I'm like, see, I got fans too. course, my fans were 6. I never played baseball, but that was kind of fun. But yeah, he's a very proud member of the Yankee fraternity. He's very proud that he still gets to go to Old Timers Day. That he was there last summer. He was just a fantasy camp, as I said. So yeah, he's as you would think. The thing that's upsetting to me and to a lot of people is the Yankees have this area in the stadium called Monument Park, and he's not in there. And he deserves to be in there. And it's time for the Yankees to right that wrong. And that's not why I wrote the book, but I am hoping that the book's getting a lot of good feedback, and I think it's going to hopefully, be a big seller and, get Roy White's name out there. And I'm hoping that through the book, he gets the recognition he deserves and gets put into Monument Park. Other thoughts, other questions?
I know he went to talk about that game where they were down 8-0. Did he go on to say what were some of the other greater games he played in?
He
the Yankees.
He talked about a lot of games. Like I'll tell you, one of the hardest things was one of the stories he told was a time he came off the bench and hit a grand slam to win a game.
Wow.
And one of the things I wanted to make sure in the book was that everything was accurate. And he said it was like, 1974, I hit a grand slam to win the game, and I couldn't find it. And I'm like, you sure? Oh, yeah. And we eventually figured out what it was. It was actually a 3-run homer and not a grand slam. But one of the more difficult things that I had to wrestle with was, do I put, I don't know how well everybody fact checks the stories in every single baseball book that's out there, right? And I've always been amazed. And I think he was right every other time that he mentioned something, but I've always been amazed when you watch the old time stories of these baseball players and, like Bob Feller talking about Ted Williams. I remember it was 1954. I threw Ted a fastball. It was just slightly outside. And then I tried to get him with a curveball. And Ted's like, yep, and it didn't break. And I hit it out to right field. And like they remember this stuff. But you think about it, they're virtuosos, right? So that was their skill. It wasn't just playing, it was knowing and remembering. And they didn't have computers, so they had to figure out, like, this guy threw this pitch at this time, and I know what to look for. But so I don't know how often people actually fact check every little fact in like an autobiography and how much room there is for hyperbole or exaggeration.
Yeah,
But
I think that's a really good point that you made about computers. This was their living. These were guys that were not making a lot of money really by today's standards of ball players, and they had no computers, they had no videotape.
Correct. And
They
so they
had
had
to keep it up here.
exactly. So one of my big challenges was, do I just let it sit? Do I just tell the story of the grand slam he hit that he didn't hit? So I said to him, I can't find it. We figured out it was a 3-run homer, and then it ended up in the book that way. So that was one of his great moments. He talked about the water cooler. He talks about a game in Japan. He had two great moments. His daughter was born in 1968 in California. And back then players weren't allowed to go with their wives when the baby was born. It's like, you're a Yankee, you stay with the team. But then the Yankees were flying out to California to play the Los Angeles Angels. And at that point, he wasn't playing every day. And so he gets home, he's with his wife and his daughter, really, like, for the first time. And his daughter was fussy that night. And to give his wife the break, he said, I'll stay up with the baby, and you rest. I'm not playing tomorrow anyway. I'm on the bench. It turns out, as I remember the story, Joe Pepitone broke his arm in that game, the game before. And so when he wakes up the next day, or he gets to the park, he hadn't really slept that night. And the manager, Ralph Houck, says, by the way, Roy, you're in the lineup. And as the story goes, Roy had a bunch of hits and he got hot and he just never cooled down. And his career really takes off after the night that he stays up with his daughter, which is just a beautiful story. Fast forward years later, he's in Japan. When he first goes to Japan, it's like in February, and his kids are in school. So he can't just pull them out of school. And so his kids don't get to see him till probably June or July in Japan. They finally come out to see him while he's in Japan to spend the summer with his wife and kids come. And in the first game that his son comes to the stadium to watch him play, Roy White hits 3 home runs in the same game. I forget how many, I think 2 right-handed and 1 left-handed. And he says, like, and that's really what helps his Japan career take off too. He started off really hot, and then he realized the Japanese pitchers started throwing him different stuff, and the way their ball moved, he said, was just a little bit different, and they'd stop giving him challenging him the way they were in the beginning. But then again, his career kicks back into gear after his son comes to the game. But he remembers saying like, you know what? Tomorrow we'll get the Japanese newspapers and I'm going to be on the cover. It's going to be all about Roy White. I hit 3 home runs. I helped us win the ball game. And they get the newspapers the next day. Sadahara O also homered in that game. And that was the home run that Sadahara O hit to pass Hank Aaron to be the all-time home run hitter in all of professional baseball. So Roy White's big moment was relegated to the back pages, and Sadahara O got all the glory, as it should have been. It's Sadahara O. But yeah, those are some of the games that I can recall quickly.
How about any philanthropic work that he was involved with?
Oh yeah, that's great. Yes. That's actually something we're doing now. So he establishes a foundation called the Roy White Foundation. And the idea was Roy White is very literate. He's a great talker, great writer. He read a lot. So like one of the guys I talked about how he always had a book in his hand. Roy White was always reading. He always had a book in his hand. He was always like, he's a smart person. And when he was thinking about that as he was looking on his career and his legacy and all that, he was talking with one of his friends and they said like, you want to do a foundation? And so he's like, yeah, but what would I raise money for? And so they came up with this idea of books and baseball. And the Roy White Foundation, what it does is it raises money for college kids to help defray those costs, $750 as a scholarship for all those things you have to pay for when you first go off to college, all the textbooks or the computers or the programs and that kind of stuff. And how he tells it, you'd think as an outsider, like, oh, that the organization must have billions of dollars or millions of dollars. It's Roy White. But in his world, he's competing with guys like Derek Jeter and the Turn 2 Foundation and the Mr. October Foundation and Joe Torre Safe at Home Foundation. So if people want to donate to a foundation, they give to the big ones. They don't necessarily find the Roy White Foundation in the Books and Baseball program. So he does this, and the foundation was really starting to really gear up and doing some great things. And then they had this big event planned in March of 2020 with I forget the artist, but it was a big time artist, musical artist. They had a big hall rented, I think, in Queens. And this was going to be the thing that really just made the foundation take off. And then, of course, with COVID, everything had to be shut down. So one of the things I said to Roy White was, listen, I'm in schools. I could think of a way that we could do a great thing. You haven't done anything in a number of years now to help your foundation get back off the feet. It would just be an interview with Roy White. People would have a chance to come meet you, and you and I will talk on the stage. And I'll ask you questions and you'll answer them, and it'll be the stuff about the book, and we'll charge a fee, and I think it'll be a big hit and people will love it. And so we did that at Ramapo College for the first time last November. And I don't know, we had 50 or so people come, and there was an auctioneer there who sold all sorts of memorabilia. So they made a good amount of money for our first event back. And then we're going to do our next event, which we haven't picked the date yet, sometime in April or May, to kick off the publication of the book, to try to, again, draw some more people and more visibility to the Roy White Foundation, so that he can help more and more kids. I'm happy to stay all night. So we don't have to talk Roy White too. We could talk Yankees.
Well, so what's next for Paul?
I did reach out to one of Roy White's teammates who wants a book written. I don't want to say anything yet because we're just sort of talking. I had said I met Roy for lunch, I guess about 2 weeks ago, to talk about setting up dates for book signings and to the next Roy White event. And I said, if I talk to player X and he reaches out to you, would you say nice things about me? And he goes, of course I will. So I did reach out to player X and I said, if you're willing, I'm willing. And that player basically said, yes, we'll be in touch. But, sometimes these things take time. So we'll be in touch wasn't, I'll call you tomorrow. It was, we'll be in touch. So I hope that's next. I also write fiction. So I was just telling my wife, all right, this is stupid. This is really neither here nor there, but I run marathons, as you said in the beginning. So last year I had this stupid idea that I was going to run every single day for a whole calendar year. And I was going to write a book about it. So I did. And I'm still working on that book, that if I can get it to the publisher by April, it's looking like it'll have a February 2024 release. So really what I've been doing every day for the last couple of weeks is writing that book. It's sort of a motivational book about running. It's a motivational book about setting goals and following through. And it's sort of a ball four type of thing, because it's a diary of a year, right? So it talks about my life and the things that I experienced, hopefully in a fun, humorous way, without sort of being ball four-ish, if it's not, even though it's not about baseball. But so I'm finishing that up. And then when that's done, I have a novel. I wrote a novel. It's called Scattering the Ashes. This was the first book I had published. It's about baseball, but it's not. It's about a son and his father. The son happens to be a Yankee fan. The father happens to be a Red Sox fan. And before he can collect his inheritance, his dad leaves these letters with an attorney that says, you need to scatter my ashes at places that were important in my life. And so it's a story of mourning. It's a story about family. It's a story about a son and his father. It's a faith story. And I think it's great. I think if you read it, you'll laugh and you'll cry and that sort of thing. But I have another fictional story that I just did in rough draft. And I said, if I don't start with another baseball book by the time I'm done with this other book about running every day, I look forward to actually writing in a little bit of a different way for a couple months and hopefully getting that novel up to speed. So that's sort of the plan. If a Yankee reaches out to me, listen, we're all dreamers, right? So Roy was just a fantasy camp, and I was talking to him this morning, and he said, everybody down there was asking about the book. They're all excited about it. They're all like, can't wait to see your book, Roy. This is great. I hear you wrote a book. So I'm thinking maybe all 100 of the guys that were down there will call me. But that's just like, who wrote your book? Oh, Paul Semendinger. He's great. Really? Let me call him. What's his number? So we'll see. The way things work out, probably none of them will. But if I'm not writing a baseball book, I do have some other writing things to be working on.
So, and then is there publicity for the summertime you have set up for this book? Yes.
We're going to be hopefully appearing in Yankee Stadium and in the Somerset Patriots game, maybe in the Wilkes-Barre Scranton. I've set up a number of meetings like this with SABR groups. I'll be reaching out to more of them. I'm going to a lot, like all the libraries in the area and things like that. We're talking about an event at the Yogi Berra Museum and that's all in the works. I'd love to go to the SABR convention, but it's July 5th, and July 4th, my family always gathers. My in-laws have a beach house, and like I have a son in Hershey, PA, and his wife, and like I don't want to rush them out. Say I want to go to Chicago, so I don't think I'm going to make the Chicago convention, which is a little disappointing. It's if it was closer, like last year. I didn't do it last year, and I regret not going to the Baltimore convention because that's close to Jersey, obviously. Chicago's just a little bit far, so that's not on the list. But yeah, we're setting all that kind of stuff up, and hopefully doing a lot of events to promote the book.
Well, you know, the Yankees will be here in August. So if you wanted to swing by with your book and do a signing, see the Yankees play the White Sox.
You know, that's not a bad idea. I'll tell you. Here's I don't want to take all your time, but here's the last funny story. I had a friend. He was a teacher who I taught with, who for a number of years was the head security guard at Yankee Stadium. And this was in the late 80s and the early 90s. And he tells this story of batting practice and this kid, this is probably around 1988, and this kid in the front row trying to get Mattingly's autograph. And he's relentless, and he's yelling, Donnie, Donnie, Donnie baseball, Don Mattingly, Donnie, I want your autograph, Donnie, Don. And Mattingly's just smiling, and he's like, I've got to do my warming up, and he's just, he can't do it. And Len Sakata, who was a middle infielder, he played for the Orioles, comes out of the Yankee dugout, and the kid calls to Len Sakata, and Len Sakata looks at him like, oh, and thinking like the kid wants my autograph. Sure, nobody wants Len Sakata's autograph. So he sort of looks at the kid, and instead of saying like, can I have your autograph, he says, hey, can you get me Mattingly's autograph? And so that broke everybody up. So long story short about publicity, I got a message on LinkedIn a couple of days ago from a New York radio personality. And hey, Paul, I was talking to Marty Appel, who's one of the Yankee big authors and who actually wrote the introduction to the book. And he gave me your contact, and I want to talk to you about appearing on my radio show. I'm like, wow. All right, here we go. Like New York radio, Paul Semendinger, big time. So I reach out to him, and it was sort of like that same Len Sakata story. I called him up, and he's like, yeah, Paul, do you think you can get me Roy White? I'm like, I'll come on. He's like, yeah, not really. So unfortunately, if I came out without Roy White to Chicago, I could do that. And I think that'd be fun. I think people might be, and that's what sometimes happens, like at libraries and things like that. I go to libraries all the time to talk about my other books. And, I get 4 people, 8 people, sometimes no people. I wrote a children's book. And I was at the library in my hometown, Midland Park, New Jersey, home of Johnny Vandermeer. And I remember going in, carrying my books in, sitting in the children's section, and nobody came. There's just this one little kid sitting on the floor playing. I said, you want me to read a book to you? He's like, okay. So he got free story time with me, and then I went home. So I'll come out, but I hope people aren't disappointed if it's just me. Like, but where's Roy?
Yeah, set the date. I'll make my way there for sure.
Bill, you're great. Thank you.
Paul, I've got to get going because I got a phone call to return to someone. I want to tell you what a pleasure this was, and what a thrill as one former educator to another. I'll bet you were a great principal.
Oh, thank you.
And I just wanted to ask you, I've got a good friend that loves baseball books, and he loves to have them signed by the author. Do you have a source where we can buy the book and that you would autograph it?
Yeah, we could do that. You could just get the book and get it to me, or give me his address, and
okay.
I could sign it and mail it to him. I'm easy.
Okay. Do we have your email in the listing there, Bill? I don't know.
I'm not sure, but you know what? We can connect you guys.
Okay,
So
all right.
we'll make that
He
happen.
He would love it. I cannot tell you, Paul, how many books he has like this. It's like his passion.
That's awesome.
And well, he has thousands and thousands and thousands of things. I mean, he's kind of like Cooperstown in the Midwest. I'm not joking.
Oh, that's awesome.
And incredible. So this has been such a wonderful thing. Bill and everybody with SABR, thanks for setting this up, because this is what makes SABR so special. And Paul, what a wonderful time. Your stories are great. Despite all that, my dad's influence, I did not become a Yankees fan, and I'm not sore about it. But I bleed card. If I could turn this around, I'd show you my shrine, as I would call it. But thank you so much for everything. Thanks for setting all this up.
Thank
Wonderful
you.
night.
Oh, thank you. It was my pleasure. Great
And
to
I've
meet
seen
you.
the pictures of his shrine, so it's legit.
It's good. It's good. I just got 7 new bobbleheads the other day, so my wife didn't bark about that, so I'm in good shape. So. Okay, we'll see.
Have a great night. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Great.
All right, so you got to tell us the Daryl Strawberry story.
Oh, you want to hear the Daryl Strawberry
Yeah,
story?
the Daryl Strawberry.
Oh, all right. So late May, I've already announced my retirement. I'm sitting in my office. It was actually a day we were having a kid who was serving as the principal of the day with me. So he was actually sitting at my desk, and I was sitting in a folding chair next to my desk. And obviously the teachers all knew this was happening, but the 4th grade team came in to ask me about their schedule for the next year, which made no sense because I was retiring. But they came in, and the teachers wanted to sit down. We need to talk about the schedule for next year. I'm like, all right, like, okay, what do you need to know? And they were just doing that to distract me. While I'm sitting there talking to them about really nothing, Daryl Strawberry walks into my office. A teacher had made a connection with Daryl Strawberry, saw him at Ruth's Chris Steakhouse, and found him to be like the most kind, generous person. They recognized him. He sort of smiled at them, and one thing led to another, and he sat down with this teacher and her husband, and then they connected, and they were like, she came to school like this probably the fall before, and said, "You're not going to believe who I had dinner with." I'm like, "Who?" And she showed me the picture on her phone. I'm like, "Daryl Strawberry? You know Daryl Strawberry? Like, unbelievable. Tell him to come to the school." Yeah, well, I only met him once, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, she reached out to him, said, our principal is retiring, and he loves the Yankees, and he was great. And if you're ever in the area, I'm sure it would be a great thrill for him to meet you. And he then said, "I'll come." And you're saying such great things about him. I want to come and meet this man. And so he walks into my office, and I think you could tell I'm not a man who's without words most of the time. And I didn't know what to say, because Daryl Strawberry is 6'7", right? And he's Daryl Strawberry. And so he walked in, and I just sat there, and I went, he's like, "Hey, how are you?" And the first thing he did was look at the desk, and there was a kid sitting there. And then he looks over to me, and he's like, "Are you Paul?" I'm like, and so I stood up, and then he shook my hand, and he put his arm around me, and I didn't quite know what to say. A couple of years earlier, he had been at a church in our area, and he gave an inspirational story about how he found faith and how he found God and turned his whole life around, which was just a phenomenal story. So I said something like, I didn't meet him that day. Everybody else was taking pictures. I didn't want to bother him. He gave his story, and then I just didn't want to do that. So I never said hi to him that day. But I'm like, I saw you when you were at that church. He's like, "Oh, thank you." And I didn't know what to say. And so the only other thing I could think of was, in 1998, the Yankees played a home game at Shea Stadium because a piece of Yankee Stadium fell out of the upper deck. And Strawberry homered that game. And at Shea, they have this big giant, or had this big giant top hat that was upside down. And when a Met would hit a home run, the giant apple would come out of the hat. And on that giant apple was a big Met logo. And when he hit the home run for the Yankees at Shea that day, they raised the apple, but they only raised it a little bit. So the Met logo didn't show up. And I'm like, you remember when you hit that home run at Shea Stadium? I mean, just like, why was I saying that? But I was like, yes, I do. And then the next thing I know, my secretary came in. My wife had taken my Yankee jerseys and my glove and put them in a bag and gave them to a teacher to bring to the school. And they're like, you're going to have a catch with Darryl Strawberry. I'm like, what? And the next thing I know, we're walking outside. A teacher goes on the PA and says, everybody can gather at the field behind the school to watch Darryl Strawberry and Dr. Sem have a catch. And everybody gathered around, and Darryl and I had a catch together in front of everybody. And the music teacher was playing Take Me Out to the Ball Game on his trumpet. And it was just like a whirlwind and awe-inspiring and wonderful. And then Darryl said, hey, let's have everybody take a picture. So the whole school then gathered on the baseball field, all the kids, the teachers and everybody, and they took a couple of pictures. He came back inside. We talked for a few minutes. And then he had to leave, of course. He was going to another school that was actually paying him. He came just on its own, out of the kindness of his heart, to come see me, to do a fundraiser for another school. So I gave him a big hug and I said, I love you, Darryl. And he said, I love you too. He left, and he did give me his autograph. I have some pictures right here on my shelf. And that was that until my very last day, which was like August 26th or something. And it was a Friday, whatever that Friday was. That teacher came back in with her phone. And she goes, here, Paul. I'm like, what? And it was Darryl again. And he goes, I know today's your official last day. I just want to again thank you for all you did, and the same kind of thing. And thank you, and I love you. And and yeah, magic. It was just magic. So yeah, Darryl Strawberry came to my school to see me, to have a catch with me, to thank me for my career. So that was remarkable.
That is amazing. It really is.
Yeah, it was. Thank you. Yeah, that was special.
Awesome.
Anyone else? Anyone else? No? All right. Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Paul.
Thank you.
Yeah,
This was
Really
great.
enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was a pleasure.
Absolutely.
For
Thanks a lot.
everything, Paul.
And bummed we won't see you at the convention.
You know what? I keep wanting to think about trying to make it there. So maybe, I don't know. I don't think I can, but maybe.
Everybody else on the call has to promise to be there. So
Did your kids know who Darryl Strawberry was? I have to ask.
The students at the school didn't
No.
really know, but the teachers knew he was coming. So they did a little history, talking about the good parts of Darryl Strawberry. I went back. This is how cute kids are. I've gone back a couple of times just to visit and to read to the classes and things like that, because I love them all still. And it's kind of cute. The little kids will say, like, do you remember when that baseball player came? Like, I forget, but like, remember last year when that baseball player came? Yes, I do. So yeah, it's cute.
All right. Well, very good.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you, everybody. This was
yeah,
great.
thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
I'd love to come back and just hang out, maybe come to another meeting just to be part of it. So
Sure.
thank
That
you.
sounds wonderful. Very good.
Thanks so
Thanks,
much.
everyone. Thank you,
Perfect.
Paul.
Have a great
See
night,
ya.
everybody. Thank you.
Have a good night.
Thank
See
you
you,
very
Tony.
much. See
Good
you.
night.
Take care, Bill.
Yep.
Take care, everyone.
You too.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thanks.